Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you find yourselves in. This is another of the excellent seminars or webinars of the International Manifesto Group. Today, we're going to be discussing the political crisis in Peru, causes and possible outcomes, as everybody is aware of what is going on there. I am Francisco Dominguez. I'm the head of the research group for Latin America at Middlesex University in London, in the United Kingdom. And before I move into it, I'll be talking about the panelists later on as I introduce them, and I'll give more information about them. But just at this stage, just to give their names, according to the order that we have, is Anaí Durand, Oli Vargas, Hector Bejar, Eliana Carlin, and Ben Norton. I just want to say a couple of things to contextualize and to set the tone, as it were, of what we may want to discuss. First of all, I want to report of solidarity activities in the UK about Peru, which I think is important, just to make people aware that as soon as the crisis broke out in Peru, the solidarity movement in the UK immediately put Peru on the radar, invited people to write articles, publicized stuff everywhere. And we have a very good connection with Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, which is a group of Labour MPs. That is to say, we have a maximum exposure for any issue that we may want to raise. They have an internet site, which is called Labour Outlook, I beg your pardon, which publishes, material, information, details, campaign work, analysis, and so on. And there's been a few already on Peru. And we even had the privilege of having one article by Anaí Durand, which was published right away with a short video. And more important that we managed to to persuade the organizers of the Latin America Adelante Conference, which took place with Latin America Adelante Conference 2022, but it took place in January 2023, which is normally attended by between 500 to 700 activists, trade union leaders, MPs, journalists, and so on, which is quite an important solidarity conference in Latin America in Europe. I think it's the biggest one there. We had a very well-attended panel on Peru. So right away, people started to ask questions, express how to express solidarity and so on. So that is important to have in mind as a part of the activities that we want to undertake. I want to just sketchily raise a few questions regarding the situation in Peru. Number one, in the last few years, the crisis of political legitimacy of the oligarchy is being tested quite massively. Not so much by mass movement, but certainly because of their own inability to sort out their own problems. In the last few years, there have been 6 presidents, which is a clear indication of their inability to stabilize the situation. And the biggest surprise was obviously in 2021, when a rural teacher was elected to become the president, won the first round, Pedro Castillo. The surprise was so big that even CNN recognized publicly they have to scramble for a CV because they didn't know who he was. In fact, they thought so little of him that actually it wasn't even counted as a possibility for the second round. And when he won the second round, then obviously the situation in Peru changed quite dramatically. I think, summarizing brutally, what we have in Peru, we had at the time, but the manifestations now are much more dynamic, much more sharp, is a parliamentary dictatorship. The oligarchy rules through parliament and uses parliament in every possible way to actually get their way, and therefore making administrations, government extremely weak. And this is one of the sources of the complications and the crisis there. They decided that they were going to do two things, in my view. Number one, they were going to punish the Pedro Castillo and his people so hard that, you know, they wouldn't actually think again of having the audacity to challenge the oligarchy in order to elect a president that came from the rural areas, especially somebody with indigenous features. And they made, the second point was to make the government impossible. That is to say, they create a situation which make impossible for Castillo to actually govern. And just to give an idea, which is a long story cut very short, in the year and a half that Castillo was in office, he was compelled, forced by parliamentary maneuvering by the right wing and the oligarchy to appoint ministers and change ministers 78 times. So that gives you an idea, you know, 1 year and a half, you move a new, and the problem is, in the case of Peru, that if you appoint a new minister, the minister have to approve by parliament. So you can appoint somebody you may want, but parliament may decide otherwise, and you have to put forward somebody else. And you have to put forward somebody else until parliament agrees to accept it. So at the end of the day, parliament was more or less participating quite actively in the composition, political composition of Castillo's government. You know, in that context, poor Pedro Castillo have to make all sorts of maneuvers, compromises, acrobatics, and so on. But we knew that whatever he did, and he knew, I think, as well, that whatever he did would not be sufficient because they wanted to get rid of him. And this happened on the 7th of December, 2022. He was charged with something like permanent moral incapacity, which is a very peculiar legal terminology, but they used that. It was basically a coup d'etat. And this was followed by, number one, a surprise for the oligarchy that the masses reacted very energetically throughout the country, not necessarily in every place in the same way, but certainly from the rural areas where Castillo came from and other areas such like those. The level of mobilization was extraordinary. The oligarchy decided to actually crush brutally this manifestation of rebellion. And as far as I'm aware, the number of people who are being killed by repression is over 60. And in some cases, I think this is known, but I want to repeat it anyway. Some people had the wound of the bullet in their chest or their stomach. Sorry to be so detailed about this, but it's important this is known. And they had a hole going in, but they didn't have any hole coming out. And the reason was these were special bullets, deliberately designed to destroy somebody inside so horribly. The basic idea behind that was, deterrence. That is to say, if you mobilize, this might happen to you. They assassinated young people, people of 15 years old, 17 years old, old people, women, and so on. There were instances where in one of the manifestations, in one of the demonstrations, they used helicopters to fire at the demonstrators from above. I don't really know what the caliber of the bullets that were used, but helicopters tend to use bigger bullets than soldiers. So you can imagine what the consequences were with that. So that was the problem. That's what the situation is. And despite this repression, there has been the rise of a powerful mass movement, which has not, gone back. They continue to mobilize, continue to organize. Their demands, as far as I know, can be summarized in 4 points that our Peruvian speakers might qualify that, add more. But if number one is the resignation of Dina Boluarte because she was not elected, and she was the vice president who betrayed her principles, and then she's been presiding over the repression of the population. I would say gusto, because she had to keep happy the people who are sponsoring her. Number two, immediate elections. Parliament at the time when Castillo was still the president had a rate of disapproval, in the region of 78, 80%. The latest information, if they are correct, are that Parliament has a rate of disapproval that goes beyond 92%. That is to say, were there to be genuine, free and fair election for Parliament, the oligarchy would lose very massively. So therefore, they began to introduce all sorts of mechanisms, all sorts of legal restrictions and restrictions of every kind to make sure that, radical people with proposals are not elected. We'll see how that goes. And then the third demand is some people demand the reinstatement of Pedro Castillo as the president. Some demand the reinstatement and the liberation of Pedro Castillo because he is in prison. And some demand only the liberation. And then finally, I think this is the most important proposal, is they are demanding an election, a kind of referendum for a constituent assembly, because they want to create the context for a new constitution, because the one they have was passed under the dictatorship of Alberto Fujimori back in the 90s. So this is the context. So what I want to do now is very briefly to problematize this, if I may, for our speakers to come back on them. They don't have to, but it's the discussion that we need to have, I think. Number one, how far is the oligarchy prepared to go by attempting to crush the movement? Are they prepared to go to the Fujimorista days when they used massive repression by killing everybody? In about 1 decade, they assassinated. I know it's more complex than this, but 70,000 people were assassinated. So this is, imagine if you want to crush the movement, would you be prepared to go back to that? It doesn't look that it's possible, but there are some currents and some politicians in the right wing that are quite willing, are proposing such a thing, not necessarily in so many words, but clearly that's what they want. Number two, how is the mass movement faring? Is it getting stronger? Is it getting weaker? Is it getting better organized? What information do we have? And then the third point is the main components of the mass movement. The media here try to suggest, some of them, very maliciously, as they always do, which is this was a rebellion of a rural movement because they were opposed to modernization, which is sort of normal. So therefore things will settle down. Is it only rural, the mass movement that exists? Is it also in the cities? Does it involve trade unions and so on? I think we have the answer to that, but it will be interesting to get details. The other point is that the Peruvian de facto dictatorship is isolated in Latin America. We know there are potentials for CELAC to do something about it. Not that I'm proposing necessarily, but I think is that I mentioned we have to consider in terms of how solidarity works, but also UNASUR. UNASUR is going to be reinstated very quickly. 7 more countries after Brazil are joining in. So that's a possibility that something can be done. And the final point I want to make is this. There seems to be a problem, and this, I'm saying this not necessarily to tell people what to do, never would do that. But there is an issue of the leadership. There is an issue of political leadership in Peru. There is an issue of political leadership in other places as well. The example I want to use for this is that the one in Honduras. In Honduras, the National Front of Popular Resistance, or the Popular Front of National Resistance, was a coalition of political social forces, trade unions, Afro-descendants, women, indigenous people, and so on. And they came together in this front, which morphed into what we know now as Libre, which is the political party that was behind the candidacy of Xiomara Castro. It took them some time. I mean, it took them 12 years to get to this point. Nevertheless, the successful election of such a small country, which is almost totally dominated by the United States, and getting away with it, and now, transforming the lives of people there, and also inserting itself geopolitically in a very different way. It indicates that the question of the political leadership is crucial. So what, if any, steps or developments are in this area? And finally, what are the main demands the Peruvians want us to organize solidarity around? So thank you very much. I will leave it there, and I want to move very quickly to what I would call un panel de lujo.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.